According to the U.S. Surgeon General, 1 of every 5 Americans experiences a mental disorder in any given year, and half of all Americans will experience such a disorder at some point in their lives. People who struggle with mental illness frequently face other challenges like addictions, housing problems, poor access to medical care, unemployment, or legal issues. The effects of mental illness go way beyond the individuals who suffer with them. They affect you and me and the person next to us in the pew. But too often, churches haven't been well enough informed with the facts about mental illness to be very helpful. And that's a shame, since church should be a place of peace, healing, and hope for the mentally ill. So how should we respond as people of faith? How do we create caring congregations that welcome and nurture the mentally ill and their families who have too often been ignored within our own churches? The term mental illness covers a wide range of problems. The most common ones we hear about are clinical depression, bipolar or manic depression, schizophrenia, and various anxiety disorders. These illnesses of the brain can affect anyone, regardless of age, race, gender, economic status, or ethnicity. Coming up, 3 people share their stories and tell how their faith was an integral part of their healing. Then we'll take a look at some ways that congregations can respond. Adolescence is a time of fun, friends, and trying out new things. But too often, the symptoms of mental illness are dismissed as normal teenage behavior. The startling statistics reveal that suicide is now the 2nd leading cause of death among 15 to 24-year-olds, and the 4th leading cause of death among children, ages 10 to 14.
Depressive episodes in my life started as far back as I can remember, and started thinking about dying, started thinking about death. Some of the things I remember doing were like romanticizing my funeral and seeing everybody that was going to be there, and how they'd feel so sorry for me that they hadn't got to know me better. And then from there it went on to actual suicide attempts. In high school, I'd taken a lot of sleeping pills, and I drank some alcohol, and I thought that if I could just eat the sleeping pills, drink the alcohol, and go to sleep forever, then everything will be all right.
Often when a teenager abuses substances, it's to mask the depression. It's to gain relief. It's like taking medicine. It gets them out of the pain. Some of the symptoms of clinical depression include this dysphoria, this down mood, this sullenness, the face drops, all the life goes out. It includes a lack of interest in what used to really excite them. Often parents who have kids whose grades all of a sudden plummet, what they've got is a kid who's depressed. Feelings of hopelessness, like it's never going to get better. Life is just like this, and I don't want to live it. Feelings of helplessness, there is nothing I can do about it. Rage, anger, aggression is a very normal aspect of adolescent depression, and that'll often come out in attacks on themselves, either literally mutilating themselves, cutting themselves, burning themselves, hurting themselves in some way. It may come out in attacks on the important people around them, their parents, people who they are disappointed in. Withdrawal from people is another one. Feeling like they can't do anything right, really low self-esteem, poor self-concept. Now, as you listen to these, you'll notice that, again, every kid has some of this some of the time. But when you get a lot of them together at one time, and when you have them more intense and they're really affecting their behavior and affecting their feelings, then you've got a higher probability of clinical depression.
My thoughts started racing, and I started having delusions. And the delusions got really scary because I couldn't discern the real from the unreal anymore. I spent 3 weeks in the psych hospital. What it turned out to be was a manic swing. Manic depression was my diagnosis, along with some psychotic features, the delusions, that is. After getting out of the hospital, I have to admit that things were very different. My friends looked at me differently, and I didn't feel a part of anymore because before that month, I'd been acting very strangely, and when I got out of the hospital, they didn't know how to act around me, and I didn't know exactly how to act around them, and it was very strange, and I felt alienated from my previous life.
There are a lot of teenagers who get depressed who in a few weeks or a few months are going to be better whether they ever talk to a pastor, a counselor, or anyone. And so there are a lot of depressions that are kind of self-evolving, if you will. There are a lot of other depressions that need treatment if the person is going to learn from them and move through them. The good thing about it is that almost always that can be done. And so there's really hope in depression. There are very few depressions that we cannot help. One of the strongest helps and strongest supports I find for teenagers, in addition to the close relationships with parents and families and other adults who obviously care and love them, is a strong spiritual faith. I believe that when a teenager begins to grasp that they can be lovingly sought out by God, who created them and created the universe and who actively involves himself in loving and caring for, immediately finds herself or himself connected with God, connected with the divine, and through that connection feels a greater sense of value and worth, and feels not so alone.
While I was in the depths of my depression, I didn't think that there was any way of getting out of it. I didn't think there was any solution, any answer except for death. That was the only way to end this kind of thing. But like I said earlier, looking back on it at this point, that's probably the furthest thing from the truth, and that suicide's like a totally permanent solution for a very temporary problem.
Depression is a whole body disorder that affects body, feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Women are twice as likely to be affected as men. Various kinds of anxiety disorders often accompany this illness. Carol LeBeau, a leading television anchorwoman in the San Diego area, speaks out about her depression in hopes of erasing the stigma associated with mental illness.
The depression I'm talking about is not based on circumstances or situations at all. It's for no reason. In fact, a lot of times your life is going from all outward appearances just beautifully well. And that even makes you feel worse. How can I be depressed? Look at my life. I'm making the money I always wanted to make, you know. I'm married to a wonderful guy. You know, people recognize me in the street and say, "Hey, Carol, love you on TV." And I'm standing there going, "You have no idea. I'm so depressed, I want to crawl in a hole and die." My husband was beside himself. He was coming home from work in the middle of the day because I'd call and say, I can't make it, I can't get to work. I can't get myself showered and dressed. What am I going to do? I was crying uncontrollably. My emotional reserves were tapped out. I was a wreck. Fortunately, a man with whom I work here at Channel 10 had been through something very similar and saw me, you know, falling down the tubes, and gave me the business card of a psychiatric physician in town. And I put the business card in my purse and forgot about it because I really figured going to a psychiatrist at this point would be conceding defeat, admitting failure. And what if somebody found out? So one evening after the late news, driving home, the sense of overwhelming was so profound. The anxiety was so severe, I could barely swallow, and I realized that was the last newscast that I was going to be able to do. And I got home, I got inside the front door, and with my purse still on my shoulder, sat down at the inside of the front door and cried until my husband came downstairs and tried to console me, and I cried all through the night, uncontrollably, and that's when we fished the business card out of my purse. And my husband piled me in the car and drove me without an appointment to the psychiatrist's office, and we sat in the lobby until he could see me. And I really figured, this is it. I've lost the fight. An institution is next. Life as I know it is over. The career's over. I have no friends, and my husband's going to leave me. And I went into this doctor's office, and as he observed me for a few minutes, he said, "Well, first of all, I believe you're suffering from severe anxiety." And he took an anti-anxiety medication, one I never even heard of. I didn't know these sorts of medications existed. And he said, here, I want you to try this, and then I want you to sit here for 20 or 30 minutes, and we'll see what happens. And as God is my witness, in 20 minutes, I was sitting comfortably in the chair, could feel my body conforming to the chair again, and talking rationally with this man. And what we did was begin a program of medical intervention, which involved some anti-anxiety medication. And this doctor, in his wisdom, based on my medical history, figured I probably had a low-grade depression as well. So he treated that with an antidepressant. And within 3 weeks, he sent me home. I took a week or two off work. But within 3 weeks, and this I will never forget, I remember walking out one day to go to work. I opened the door, and I looked outside, and the sky looked so blue, and the leaves were just fluttering in the breeze on the trees, and they looked so pretty against the bright blue sky, and it smelled good. And I thought, what a beautiful day. And I'm telling you, I had not had a thought like that in close to a year. I had lost my ability to experience joy. And it's an insidious sort of fall into nothingness, so you don't realize it's happening. When it comes to this whole idea of a stigma, I find it highly arrogant that people still today think that something can go wrong with your toe or your knee or your liver, you know, or you can get something wrong with your scalp or eyeball. Whoever decided that you couldn't have something go wrong with your brain? The most complex mechanism within our entire bodies, and something can't go wrong with it? And that if it does, heaven help you, you must not be a very strong person. You know, you must have some deep sin in your life. There needs to be a little bit of onus, a little bit of responsibility on the person with the illness, that once you have it diagnosed and are treating it, then you need to be the one to help people feel at ease about it. In my case, it's garden variety depression and anxiety, but it's so common among people that they need to know that there's help out there. And I want to tell you something else too. You can't, if it really is chemical depression, you can't positive think it away. Because buddy, I'm a positive thinker. And you can't wish it away, will it away. I got on my knees on the patio, on the cement in my backyard, and prayed to God, please give me the strength. You know, take away whatever is wrong. What's wrong with me? And frankly, he didn't take it away. It really ticked me off too. But I can tell you what he did do. He provided the means by which to cope with the situation. Co-workers who supported me and said, hey, let's help her through this. Company, my boss and general manager who understood that this was, you know, not the norm for me, and they were willing to wait it out for a while and see how I do. I was blessed with a lot of things. God answered my prayers, just not in the way I'd imagined.
Major depression is not a normal part of aging. Depression often co-occurs with other medical illnesses such as heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and cancer. Because many older adults are at greater risk for these physical illnesses, as well as various social and economic difficulties, individual healthcare professionals can mistakenly conclude that depression is a normal consequence of these problems. This attitude contributes to depression in older adults being underdiagnosed and undertreated.
Depression in the latter stages of our aging process is quite a common phenomenon. The aging process really begins to come in significant play during our 50s. It's in that period when a lot of transitions seem to take place in a lot of people's lives.
When I hit menopause, I started not sleeping at night, having hot sweats, and then I had a lot of anxiety. And in a couple months, I really developed full-blown clinical depression. And I had no clue what it was, but it was pretty devastating. And I got to the point where I really couldn't work, couldn't concentrate. I've always been a person that would rather do anything than take medication, and so I was really reluctant to take it. When I went into the clinic, Dr. Bird talked to me for hours on end and finally convinced me. He said, well, what have you got to lose? You're very ill. You've lost your job. You're not in your home. And all of a sudden I thought, oh, yeah, I don't have much to lose, do I? And I might gain something. So started taking medication, and that really helped. I was doing really well, and I had a new job, and I had a new boyfriend, and I thought life was wonderful, and I would never be depressed again. And so I went off my medication, and I got seriously depressed again. And that time I tried to commit suicide, and it was pretty devastating for everybody. And I recovered again, and I'm still on my medication. I know that medication is one component of my staying well, and so I do it.
But the medications don't offer the more powerful, important aspect, which is somebody who really understands, someone who I know cares about me and who I care about. One of the most significant ministries that the church can provide, particularly in working with the aging who we know is a period of going to have depression in it because of the changes and transitions, is to provide a constancy of people that really connect and listen to what the story of my life is about.
The strong community helped a lot because people would come and feed me, people would make me go swimming, people would make me walk. They didn't know what else to do, but they really helped me just keep going until I could get some kind of relief.
Our religious journey becomes extremely important at the latter stages, because it's in the religious journey that we are able more and more to feel affirmed by our relationship with God, by our relationship with life's acceptance of who we are, which is God's acceptance of who we are, and certainly out of our sacred scriptures and out of our sacred traditions is this constant affirmation, no matter who you are a child of God.
I feel like I've come a long way. I've been on a journey, and I feel good about where I am now, and I'm still employed and still working with the church, and about to have a new grandson in October, so life is good.
Secular society is finally talking about mental illness. Unfortunately, people are reluctant to speak out about mental illness in our faith communities because of the stigma and shame too often associated with these illnesses. Many religious groups still make the assumption that mental illness is a moral or a spiritual failure instead of a treatable illness. And very few seminaries incorporate adequate information about mental illness in their core curriculum. Clergy and church leaders also deal with mental illness, but they often suffer in silence. I know this because I was one of those persons. I did not let my church know of my illness until 2 years after my first depressive episode and my hospitalization. With the support of my senior pastor, I wrote a letter to the congregation in the newsletter entitled, "The Burden of Silence." This was the beginning of a long journey. In 1996, the United Methodist General Conference passed a resolution mandating the General Board of Church and Society to encourage United Methodist congregations to become caring communities. Other denominations have made similar statements, and yet our churches are still uneasy about dealing with issues surrounding mental illness. There is a way to enable our congregations to have a better understanding of mental illness and to foster ministry to and with persons with mental illness and their families. By following 5 primary actions, our congregations can begin this process. The first step is education. Education must begin with a commitment by the clergy and church leaders. When mental illness is addressed in the worship setting through sermons, prayers, and liturgy, it becomes a topic that can be more openly discussed in the church. Education continues outside the worship setting. Classes can be offered to learn more about mental illness and ways congregations can be supportive. I have shared my story in the book, In the Shadow of God's Wings, Grace in the Midst of Depression. There is an accompanying group study guide which provides small group leaders with the material needed to facilitate a 4-session study. Other resources for faith communities continue to be developed. A congregation can sponsor educational programs, speakers, and videos from outside organizations, local hospitals, and various speakers' bureaus. Invite a person to come in and share his or her story, and find a way to lift up mental health issues through Mental Health Month in May or Mental Illness Awareness Week in October. To continue to minister to and with persons with a mental illness and their families, a church congregation must make a covenant to do this ministry. This can be done in a variety of ways. First and foremost is gaining support from the clergy and the church's governing body. A task force, which includes persons dealing with a mental illness, can help to develop a mental health ministry appropriate to your congregation. And as with all that we do, pray that the commitment made by your congregation will be a 3-way covenant between the congregation, those with mental illness, and God. While education is an ongoing process, the third element in creating a caring congregation is reaching out to welcome persons and families struggling with these issues. Congregations can put a welcoming statement in worship bulletins, church newsletters, and in appropriate community publications. This outreach is evangelism to those who have felt forgotten by their faith community in a time of great need. Ushers and greeters will need to be trained on what it means to be welcoming and supportive. Just as Jesus intentionally sought out the man named Legion, the church must learn to seek out the mentally ill and their families. Jesus returned this man to full membership and participation in the community, which should be the goal of any congregation's outreach ministry. Once persons feel welcome, the community needs to be prepared to provide the fourth component, support. Your church can open your building to allow community support groups to use your space, much as many do for AA. The National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, or NAMI, offers a family-to-family program that provides support for the often forgotten family members of the mentally ill.
Our son was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and we needed all the help that we could find. What we were able to do was to connect with what NAMI offers, which is, they have an acronym which is SEAR, which is support, education, advocacy, and research.
Churches do offer space, so people are coming and going from the church premises to those programs, and we feel again that that's a great association between, the Alliance and our church community.
Our son was homeless for 3 years, but now he has an apartment and he has a job. He works 20 hours a week. He runs his own car. He's paying for it. He pays for his insurance. He runs his own checkbook.
Pays all his own bills.
And that was
right.
And so he has come in a tremendous way.
Stephen Ministers or other one-to-one support programs can help persons practice the ministry of presence to those who are hurting.
I believe that one of the most enriching and enhancing things a congregation can do is to train people in a ministry like this. Ordained clergy are not always available to spend the time that such individuals need. And for a layperson to say, I'm here, I care about you, I'm here to bring you God's love, and to listen, has been such a blessing. It's a two-way street. It's a mutual experience that as I have learned to care, I have learned that I am cared about by a loving God and by others who need me to care for them.
Okay, Bill.
A parish nurse or health ministries program can be a valuable resource.
We had a presentation called Understanding Depression. Usually with my presentations in the health ministry field, we would have 20 or 30 people arrive, and much to my amazement, 134 people attended this particular presentation. So following that presentation, I developed a support group with Reverend Susan's help, and that was open to people dealing with depression, someplace for them to come in a safe atmosphere of the church.
The church I served began a healing service. Are any among you sick? They should call for the elders of the church and have them pray over them, anointing them with oil in the name of the Lord. The statistics are clear that the rate of relapse drops dramatically when a person gets medication, appropriate therapy, and when they can be reconnected to their family and their community, including their faith community. The last component of a caring congregation is advocacy. Your community can make a difference in erasing the stigma associated with mental illness. There are a number of advocacy groups that will help your congregation be alert to pending legislation regarding the mentally ill. Your community can inform through the church newsletter and encourage your members to contact elected officials to let them know you care about services and parity issues for persons who are mentally ill. The soaring cost of health care, parity in health care coverage, and the growing number of uninsured Americans are issues that challenge us all.
The stories we've heard are stories of hope, and each person we've profiled was able to overcome the stigma associated with mental illness and seek appropriate help and support. The faith community can be an integral part in providing hope to persons and their families struggling with mental illness through education, referrals, and pastoral support.
In my journey with depression, I learned that when we begin an inward journey of self-discovery, we find that we are led back to the community and to caring for others. Part of my journey has been to understand my bleakest times as times of fertile darkness. When a person begins to live into that darkness, embrace it, and even befriend it, God's presence is most often revealed. And when a person with a mental illness is able to use their faith and spirituality as a source of healing and support, they discover a renewed sense of vision, hope, and possibilities for the future. Spirit God, you know our needs, our wounds, our hurts, our fears, even before we can form them into words of prayer. You are patient with us. You are protective of us. You are present with us until such time that we are able to ask for what we need. Thank you, Spirit God, for your healing taking place within before we are even aware of how broken we have become.
This video is a project of Mental Health Ministries, a program of the California Pacific Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Funding was provided by the Georgia Lynch Fund and by the Friends of Pacific Media Ministry.